Welcome to International Career Journey Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sherrie Lee, career coach for international professionals. Hello everyone, and I'm really pleased today to welcome my special guest, Adlena Wong. She's the founder of Super Shiok Eats, a Singaporean food business based in Auckland, and she's also got a background in communications in New Zealand and Singapore. Adlena, welcome to International Career Journey Podcast.
Thank you, Sherrie, for having me here.
Could you tell us a little bit about what brought you to New Zealand?
So I've been in New Zealand. Actually, this is my 8th year now. And what brought me here is really this desire and itch to want to experience life overseas ever since I was in my late teens and early 20s. Never got a chance to. And back then and now, well, I will discuss more as to how I could manage to come to New Zealand 8 years ago, but here I am.
And what's your day job?
So my day job actually comes, with my professional identity, as you mentioned, as a comms practitioner. So I lead internal comms in a public sector organization here based in Auckland. And I currently work there on a part-time basis. And I guess my other day job, which I'm really passionate about, is actually building the food business that you mentioned, Super Shiok Eats. So that apart from motherhood has taken up more than 24 hours of my time in a day.
I'd like you to cast your mind back to when you first reached New Zealand. And as many of our viewers and listeners would appreciate, if you're a migrant in a new country, sometimes it feels like you have to start from scratch. But the time you came was probably an added challenge because you came when it was just before COVID. How did all those experiences give you the experience of being new in New Zealand?
Well, of course, back then, nobody saw COVID coming, right? So I think as with any migrant, we all came here bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and, obviously floored by the beauty of, New Zealand scenery, the space and all of that. So, but I mean, on hindsight, if you were to ask me, actually, COVID was kind of like a good thing to happen to me and my family. I think, it's a bit of a quote unquote double whammy kind of situation, right? First of all, we are new to the country, and then shortly after, we are kind of locked in. So for a good 2 years, we were self-reliant. We were on our own, we like our bubble, right? That's what Auntie Cindy used to say, stick to your own bubble. So I think for it made us stronger as a family unit, is how I see it. So of course it kind of I guess makes mingling far more difficult, at coming here in your mid-30s with young children. It's quite hard to break into, the local circles and a local community. So I think COVID kind of compounded that. But as I've said earlier, if I looked at it from a more positive lens, it really made our small family much stronger. I think that that's something that would have not been as possible in Singapore, just because, back at home, we will have our familial obligations. We will have our kids shared with our parents-in-law, we have our friends. So, these distractions could have meant we would not have been able to focus inwardly on ourselves as a family, as husband and wife, as parents. So, and I think the fact that how we are today, my relationship with my daughters and my husband are much stronger as a testament to the positive side that came out of coming here and then getting locked in by COVID. Yeah.
It's amazing to find silver linings even in such a challenging and disruptive time. Tell us a little bit about how you found your first job in New Zealand.
Hmm. So my first job in New Zealand, well, if you're talking about like not related to kind of like my background, my first job in New Zealand was actually a paper run. So, I mean, again, when I came here, I really thought I wanted to start on a clean slate and, preferably I would not want to like first delve straight into, doing comms and all that, like explore new things. But I guess even that, is not quite easy to do and point a finger to, like, what exactly do I want to do, right? And because I was, settling everybody down, figuring out my new environment, drop off, pick up, making everyone's meals, all do the household chores. Um, what's left that I could do is few and far between. Because for context, when I moved here, I kind of moved into like a new I wouldn't say a gated community, but it's still quite a closed community, which is there's pros and cons in a sense. Pros is that you kind of know everyone and you kind of make friends a bit easily because everyone is new to that community, but cons is that you are that community. It's a bit like the village kind of situation. And then I thought, okay, what could I do between school drop off and pick up? And then I just happened to see an ad in the Facebook community group asking, hey, anybody interested in the paper run? And I was like, okay, first of all, I could get in some exercise. And second of all, I could, literally walk around the neighborhood and get to know my neighborhood better. So yeah, that was actually my first job. And then shortly after, because I kind of volunteered in my old eldest daughter school for a bit. That got me a role that I applied to as a teacher aide. So that was my kind of second job, and I think that was also great from a parent's perspective of understanding a bit about what the New Zealand schooling system is like, how they do things behind the scenes. And then shortly after, I then kind of transit into helping out at a daycare. So yeah, so those were my non-coms kind of job experience that I got. But the first comms related job experience was actually a contract role at an insurance company. So it was a maternity cover for 6 months before I landed my current role as an internal comms lead. Yeah.
That's amazing, Adlena. I love the story of how you wanted to do something while you were settling in. You saw opportunities within the local community, and one thing kind of led to another. And it's wonderful how you talked about being a teacher aide in a school was not just a job, but it really got you closer to New Zealand culture. And I kind of recall when I first came to New Zealand with very young children, one of the things that taught me about New Zealand culture was actually just reading books to my children that was in the book bag. It was attending some event for children and their parents. It was hanging around talking to fellow parents. I learned a lot more about New Zealand culture that way than reading any book, if there were books to be read in the first place. I'm also curious about Super Shiok Eats. Now, when did that business come about?
So as you know, like, being an immigrant to a new place, everything is kind of an experiment. So that first place that we landed in, the suburb that we first landed in, I mean, being the Kiasu Singaporean, right? You're like, oh, okay. Although at that time my daughter was only in year one, so many more years to go before I need to think about intermediate or high school. But somehow I just like, oh no, I think I need to think a bit longer term. Like, what are the intermediate options for her or high school options for her? And because it's a new neighborhood, you know, these are not established. It's a bit like, the Singaporean version of like non-mature estates. So that means that yeah, in terms of the credibility of the school, it's not yet there. So yeah, so in the spirit of, a bit of a longer term thinking, I had to move neighborhoods. And when I moved to that neighborhood, that shortly after COVID kind of hit, so that meant a lot of things. One is like forget about looking for a job at that time because my job was to make sure everyone was fed. We are not disturbing daddy or my husband who has to work from home and having calls all the time. So making sure the kids are like, yeah, occupied, home learning and everything. But at the same time, I needed to take care of myself, give myself some kind of distraction, a bit of make myself feel worthy and useful kind of thinking. And I thought, oh, what could I do that is possible under all these circumstances? And I just thought, well, let's try and put my cooking skills to the test and see, beyond my family and my friends, who else would appreciate it. And the thing is, I already had like my foundation done in a sense. I don't know, maybe at the back of my head, I've always wanted to come to New Zealand to start a food business. So when I came shortly after I came here, like maybe a year, I decided to just get food safety training. So I've got that certification because without that, you can't start a food business. So one thing led to another. And yeah, and I think at that time, you know, it felt quite silly to start a food business in the middle of a lockdown, of a pandemic, but it there was no better time, I guess, on reflection, because people couldn't travel home to eat whatever they want to eat. People, yeah. So I've had customers who say, "Oh, thank you for doing this. You have helped me feel so much better. I feel less homesick. Like eating your noodles reminds me of this moment in time at a particular coffee shop, a hawker center in Singapore." So yeah, I guess on hindsight, yeah, I guess I did the right thing. I did the right thing at the right time. Yeah.
That's amazing. As a fellow Singaporean, my heart is strangely warmed when I hear you talk about food. And just so everyone knows, I have tasted Adlena's wonderful bak chor mee, which is minced meat noodles with a special paste and sauce. I still remember the taste I had in my mouth. Ah, truly home. So thank you, Adlena, for bringing your culinary gifts to this part of the world. And speaking about food business and thinking about your day job and your other day job, how would you characterize the kinds of work that you do? Because I've heard you share on several occasions about how this was kind of your side hustle, but kind of not. So how do you tell people about what you do for work?
Mm. Yeah, so I think we kind of briefly touched on this earlier with you, Sherry, like, when you said like, oh, actually this podcast thing is a big part of you now, and you kind of feel the sting a little bit when people say, oh, is this like a side hustle, like a hobby? And I feel the same way recently. Like, I don't know why it took this conversation with a new customer when he said like, oh, so this must be just a side hustle. And it made me a bit angry inside, because like there's no way anyone would put in this much effort and energy and dedication to a side hustle. So if I were to, I think I've recently put this up on a post on LinkedIn. I think we have been conditioned, especially as Singaporeans, to attach our self-worth and value to like a role, a job title in an organization. That makes you valid, and that makes you, I don't know, a person. And I think with being in New Zealand, having a bit literally more space to think about things, right? I think I have started to reframe that. It's not about, you know, how much time you dedicate to something and therefore qualifies it as a full-time job or a passion project or a side hustle or a part-time job or casual work, right? Because you can be a casual worker, but if you if the kind of energy and effort you put into it is above and beyond, then you are not a casual worker. You are actually, you love what you do. And I think that's what I see, what I'm trying to achieve here. I mean, if I were to put it bluntly, having a quote unquote day job, a salary, and an employer, it's solely to pay for the bills, you know. And I mean because that's my reality, right? I mean, having a family and having bought a house, um, banks don't take too kindly to small business owners. Like you have to show your pay slips, right? So to me, that's just a means to an end. And Super Shiok Eats is the sky is the limit for me when it comes to Super Shiok Eats. So yeah, I've had that reframe only quite recently, which is quite unfortunate. I don't know why it took me that long. I feel like the amount of energy that I'm putting into it like takes it beyond a side hustle. So I would implore anyone who, has this kind of conversation with me in the future to not refer Super Show Eats as my side hustle anymore.
Your message is loud and clear, Adlena, and thank you so much for sharing from your heart about how we think about our jobs. So, not too long ago, I wrote a blog post about portfolio careers, just reflecting on my own career journey. And I think increasingly for people like yourself who feel like I will not be defined by the job that pays my bills and maybe a little bit more, but I want to be able to have the flexibility and creativity of doing things that I find valuable, that I find enjoyable, that I find give so much to other people. And I love it when you say, do not call this a side hustle. You almost have to print that on a t-shirt.
I know.
Let's go for some
Hey,
merch, Adlena.
I
Yeah.
know. We totally should.
Because
That's a
that's
good
that's where
idea.
we get the profits, right? Merch.
Yes, much, much. Yes, yes. Oh my gosh. See, these kind of things can only come about with this kind of conversations. So,
And speaking of which, I also wanted to share with our viewers and listeners that I first met Adlena, not in person, not in Auckland, because I'm based in Wellington, but actually on LinkedIn. We kind of found each other because of the things we shared and we had some common connections. And very soon we got in touch. We had a few Zoom calls. And that's how Adlena is on my podcast today. But on the subject of LinkedIn, I just wanted to touch on the fact that you do share quite openly about your experiences working in New Zealand. And I wonder if you could share a little bit of what you've started, I guess, in your posts about the differences between New Zealand and Singapore workplace culture.
so I sometimes, when I get asked that question and I can't stop but wonder, is it a culture thing or is it me? Like, is it my idiosyncrasies that is actually dictating how I am reacting to what I see at the workplace, or is it truly a culture thing, right? Because at the end of the day, culture is not, you know, not something that is like huge or extraordinary. It is actually in the little things that happen every day that you don't really think about. So the the thing about working in New Zealand, I find if I have to pick one thing, it's which I'm pretty sure a lot of my Singaporean mates would agree, it's really the having to slow down drastically, and also having to, because we came here. I mean, those of us who decide to leave our country, the little red dot, would have at some point have this thinking, which is the world is much bigger than our little red dot, which it is, right? And the Singapore way is not always the right way, right? But the irony is that when you come, like for us who come here to New Zealand, and then, we kind of look at the way our Kiwi colleagues do their things, we inevitably, will go, oh, there's a much better way of doing it. So I wonder if when we say there's a much better or faster way of doing it, is that our Singaporean way of doing things? Like, would our way, again, as we have always thought being in Singapore, still the better way? It seems like the answer could be yes, but at the same time, when you go to someone else's country, you also have to respect that, right? So it's do what the Romans do. So in my, very casual conversations with fellow Singaporeans, it's like, is it harder for people, we ask ourselves, as people who came from a very fast-paced, efficient environment, is it harder for the likes of us to slow down, or harder for us, or harder for our Kiwi mates to like kind of speed up and join the rest of the world? I'm not sure, because I do see quite a lot of, conversations on LinkedIn as well, especially, when we talk about policies or economy, like um, a lot of like big name people, public figures in New Zealand actually reference Singapore a lot as a model that they would like to follow. Um, so then it got me thinking like, oh, maybe we were not wrong to think like, there is a better way of doing things, right? Um, I don't know. It's a bit of a, yeah, it's a bit of a tension with regards to this particular bit, yeah, for me.
It's really interesting to hear how you talk about speed as the first thing that comes to mind in terms of the differences.
Mm,
And just to add to that conversation, for me, it's the level of trust. So I find that there's an innate trust between Kiwis in the community and the workplace. We'll assume you get the work done if you say you're going to. We won't
mm,
think otherwise. And we place a lot of emphasis on relationships. If the relationship is good, if we connect well, that is good for business, that is good for getting things done, and that is good for the overall longer term team culture and so on. And I wonder if that's also another point of difference between New Zealand and Singapore, because in Singapore we have a lot of rules,
mm,
mostly
mm,
because we don't trust you to do the right thing. So we have to have a lot of rules to make
mm,
sure you do the right thing.
mm. I wonder, I wonder if that's less because we don't trust each other, but it's more of just the idea that we are a nanny state. I don't think it's because we don't trust each other. Because, if we don't trust each other, right, can somebody explain the chop culture in Singapore? You know, so if I may clarify for your listeners, chop culture meaning like, we literally, if you go to a food court, hawker center, in order to reserve our seats, just because, we are afraid that, when we buy our food, we will walk around with a tray of hot food with nowhere to sit. So we think ahead that way. So what we do is we take, well, the most paranoid of us would just put a pack of tissue paper to like reserve the seats on the table. But I have seen people putting their mobile phones, their laptops, and then they just go forth and prosper, just, left all their valuable stuff there. And I'm like, dude, like, are you serious? So I do not think, I don't know, because okay, that actually touches on like the whole how safe Singapore is, right? But safety and trust kind of come together, you know? So I wouldn't say that, in Singapore we don't trust each other, but I think because we are being used to be nannied a lot, taken care of by our government. I mean, because we are small, right? So it's kind of easier to take care of a small place than a big place like New Zealand, where also the culture is she'll be all right. you know? So that is the completely opposite end of the spectrum. Here we have, Singapore, we have this mother who is always helicoptering over us. And then we are now in a country that always tells us she'll be all right. So I think that is the biggest like tension we had to navigate as Singaporeans living in New Zealand. Um, yeah, not I can't quite find a word for it, but I don't think it's trust though. Yeah, yeah.
I think you've raised the idea of how it's multifaceted. On one
Mm,
level, it could be read as trust, and yet on another level, it could be the whole idea that we don't experience that much independence and autonomy as our New
mm,
Zealand counterparts do, and add
mm,
another element of the virtue of efficiency, or perhaps just being not given the time to relax or breathe, depending
mm.
on how you view that. And on the topic of cultures, if someone asks you, where are you from? How would you answer that?
Well, I still say I'm from Singapore and I'm Singaporean. I mean, just on the technicality that I still do have a Singaporean passport and I still speak in a Singaporean accent. And um and it would be disingenuous of me to be running a Singaporean food business to not still see myself as a Singaporean. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like there is also a kind of pressure, um, whether internal or external, right? Like just because you move to a country after a certain period of time, oh, you have to feel more like being, I mean, someone in that country. But I mean, 8 years for me is not a short time, neither is it a long time. But to be fair, the the most formative years of my life were in Singapore. So it's going to take a much longer time, I think, if I were to move into another country, whether it's in New Zealand or otherwise, for me to think of myself as part of that country. So, I mean, I would like to again reframe it as like Singapore is always my home, but New Zealand is like my life. It's like how, in professional speak, there's work-life balance. So I would like to pitch the idea of there is home life. So home is 8,000 kilometers away still, but life for me right now is here. Yeah.
So if someone asked you, where's home for you? Does that answer ever change?
I would say for now it doesn't. Yeah, I think it will still be like Singapore. I think and another reason for that is apart from, I spent most of my life being born and raised there. I think another reason is because family is still there. So it's only the people who have moved here is like just myself, my husband, and my two girls. So our parents, they're all back home. So there is still that tie. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm very close with my mom. My husband is very close to his family. So I think, um, yeah, that tie still being there makes it hard to like kind of break it just because we are in a different country. Yeah.
Just going back to what we discussed earlier about how Super Shiok Eats is not your side hustle and
Mm.
how your other day job, well, is a job. How do you view your professional development as a communications professional?
I I think if there is one thing that I'm grateful for, um, coming here, like I said earlier, like, starting on a clean slate and everything. Well, I mean, well, technically it's not clean because I still, kind of lean back to my comms professional background. But I must say, like, New Zealand is so much more forgiving, if you decide to do something different, you know. I mean, of course, part of the reason is because nobody knows me here, right? So nobody is here to judge me or anything if I've, yeah, pivoted to something completely different from what I was educated or trained in. So, and I think literally like because of the whole, yeah, she'll be all right kind of mentality is I think the reason why I have, I guess, like the courage um to give this a go and try. Like say if I was still in Singapore, I would, I don't know, most likely still be in comms. I'll probably be a head of director of comms somewhere, right? Unlike now where I am today. But then again, still doing what I do in my professional kind of sphere. I have never, I hand to heart, I have never like stopped doing the hard yards. So you know how like, when you progress to in terms of level of seniority in your role, right? Sometimes you just don't do those stuff anymore, but I still do, I still do the writing, I still do the research, I still do put in the paragraphs in MailChimp, I do the photographs, I organize town halls, I do everything still. Um, so, I mean, I think I see value in that. Like, I've not lost touch in the craft. Like, it does not mean that I am senior, um, in terms of, years of experience, of existence. It does not mean that I have forgotten how to do things, which I think actually has served me well because if I wasn't hands-on still in the whole marketing com space, I wouldn't have been able to kind of translate that into my business, because when you start a business, you need to know like the branding, how to market to people and how to talk, blah, blah, blah. So I think the fact that I didn't let go of my craft and still doing it, yeah, has translated really well for Super Shiok Eats. Yeah.
What I'm hearing is how you have embraced part of the Kiwi culture and giving it a go and knowing that everything will kind of work out well eventually.
Mm.
And it's interesting how you retain such a strong core identity as being a Singaporean, even the way you might think, well, let's find a more efficient way, let's find a faster way. But at the same time, living life here in the moment, in the present, where this is where your business is, this is where your family is, and this is where you keep on, like you said, honing a craft, doing the hard yards. And it's nothing quite like getting your hands dirty, so to speak, to know exactly what it is you want to communicate to your audiences. And as we wrap up our podcast today, I've got a few questions for you to round off. What is the one thing you miss about Singapore?
One thing I think would be just public transport. Like good, efficient, reliable public transport that doesn't cost you an arm and a leg and make you question life decision like, oh, if it's going to cost me $10 to take a bus, but $7 for my parking, which should I choose? So yeah. I kind of miss that. I think yeah, having that actually open up would have opened up a lot of worlds in New Zealand. Like imagine being able to get from Auckland to Wellington in 2 hours on a high-speed rail, man. Imagine that,
I am
right?
imagining it.
Yeah. I mean, it's been done in Japan. Can't see why geographically it can't be done in New Zealand. Just saying.
Well, let's
We would,
keep our hopes up on that, just to keep
I
it
know, I
alive.
know. We would have solved so many issues, housing issues, jobs issues, overcrowding, whatever, right? Yeah. So something to think about, to consider.
Okay, next question. What is the best piece of advice you've received about making this career or country transition?
I wouldn't say I wouldn't say that advice is like specific to me, but I think it's really I guess meant to be helpful for, people like me who have, maybe moved to New Zealand in the last 10 years, because you have to understand like our generation who moved here has experienced Singapore in one of her most prosperous and successful years. So whatever, baby boomers who moved here 20, 25, 30 years ago experience is very different. Our perspectives are different. So, you know, sometimes I would lean into advice that comes from people who are more similar to me rather than, the other groups. And typically my peers, these groups of people would basically actually say things like, hey, don't forget, if we were in Singapore, we would have probably not afford to be able to own and drive two cars. We would not be able to afford to live in like a landed property with land and a backyard and a garden, So I guess what they're trying to say is like everything is a trade-off. Yeah. So I think having that perspective really, really helps me personally as well. Yeah.
And finally, if you could tell your pre-move self one thing, so before you came to New Zealand,
Mm.
what would you tell her?
I think I'll tell her like no matter what happens, like you can always come home. Yeah. Like, yeah, no matter what, for good or for bad or whatever, if it doesn't work out, you can come home. Um, which I think is kind of like comes from um my position as a mom. Like I would like to tell my daughters, you know, um, if ever next time things don't work out for them, if they get married, things don't work out, come home. If life gets too hard, come home. Like, yeah. I mean, like always come home. Like that's what home is, right? Yeah.
Thank you, Adlena, for your precious words of wisdom, of insight. Really enjoyed talking to you today.
Thank you, Sherry, for having me.